are live on our charity page. Just 1 second. Yeah, I believe we are live.
Yeah, we are.
Okay. Oh yes, we are definitely live. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a few viewers already. So thanks everyone for joining us. We're probably going to start properly in a couple of minutes. Maybe we'll just give some people time to join. But it's good to see you both. Hi James, how you doing?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, we're fine, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for joining, James. So obviously you are one of the trustees of the London Autism Group charity, who are hosting this live stream, and we're really honoured to have you on the live stream, Lola Alvarez-Romano. Do you want to give us a little intro about yourself, Lola?
Well, okay. Yes, my name is obviously Lola. I'm a child and adolescent psychotherapist and an adult psychotherapist. I've worked in the NHS for a number of years, and I've worked in child and adolescent mental health for a number of years, and I also work in a special school for children with profound and multiple disabilities, where I do support for families. So that's me.
Wonderful. Great to have you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. And we've also got Daryl as well. I don't know if you want to say hello to Daryl there, James.
He's busy at the moment. I think he may work his way over. Yeah, please excuse any interruptions.
No, not at all. We'd be happy to have him join us.
My little boy,
in the discussion for sure. Okay, so a few more people are logging in now. Looks like we've got about 10 people at the moment. So yeah, just to give a little bit more context to the purpose of the live stream. So the purpose of this live stream is to talk about some of the issues, mental health issues, that the autism community, by that I mean autistic people and their families and wider networks, might experience because of the Covid-19 epidemic. In particular, I'm thinking about, all of the routines that are being disrupted, all of the sort of predictability of life, all of the structure of life being shaken up, access to services and families and friends. And so it must be a very, very strange and confusing and anxiety-provoking time for a lot of people, particularly I suspect the autistic population and the wider community. So because of that, we thought it would be a prudent thing and helpful thing for the charity to run some of these live streams. So we're going to try and do this weekly with different people, different special guests. And yes, we have Lola with us this week, which is great because Lola, obviously you've got your expertise in mental health and psychotherapy, and you've done a lot of work with autistic people and families. So it's just great to have your insight and talk about how the community might look after themselves, what some of the issues may be, and any general good advice that you might have. And if questions come in, I'll for sure pick them up and highlight them. But in fact, we do have a specific question that was sent to us. So maybe we should start there. Okay, so the question that was sent through on Twitter was as follows. My daughter with Asperger's and anxiety has had to take on so much. She just got a job that she loves, a teaching assistant in a school for vulnerable children. I'm immunosuppressed, and we live with my 75-year-old dad. So it's all change and fear, and her shopping. She is amazing, but struggling. So Lola, obviously, I think a lot of people are going to be feeling this way. As I said, a lot of change, a lot of anxiety. I think it'd probably be particularly scary if you're living with elderly people who are perhaps vulnerable to the coronavirus, particularly vulnerable. So have you got any thoughts about that particular question? Any advice?
Well, Well, I think, you've already said some of this. I think we need to start by saying that these are very anxiety-provoking times for all of us, and that perhaps, one of the main differences might be that autistic people deal with anxiety a little bit worse at times than the rest of us. But I think my guess is that not just autistic people, but their families and all their surroundings are going to be in a heightened state of anxiety because of the news changing every single day. So I think it is, in a way, it is difficult to avoid some of these permeating into us. For an autistic person, I think what they need to do is something more along the lines of being able to impose filters on reality, really, sort of mediate, choose which sources of information they want to listen to, because I think it's very easy to feel overwhelmed. And like I said, this applies to all of us, to the neurotypical population too. That when you have too much information, and there is information coming from all sides, particularly today with social media. So, and the news channels are on practically the whole day talking about the same things, and there is special programs and all of this. So I think one of the first things I would recommend for autistic people and for the general population is choose which sources of information you are going to give access to, because it's very easy to feel that you're being swamped by all of that's coming our way, and I think for an autistic person, feeling overwhelmed is quite a familiar feeling when they have too much input, too many inputs at once, particularly because it involves having to differentiate who do I believe, what do I believe. If information is contradictory, you have to start sort of assessing which one you're going to listen to and which one you aren't, and it's very easy to get into a quite a negative spiral, actually. So that would be my first recommendation for any autistic person out there.
I mean, I think
a lot of typical people too.
Yeah.
Because it can get really, really quite overwhelming for all of us.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is, the thing that I recommend autistic young people that I work with is to find a safe place in their home, or a place where they can go and regain some of this equilibrium that they lose when they feel overwhelmed. So this could be, their bedroom. It could be a particular point in the garden. It could be just holding an object or being with someone, a place that they experience as helping them to get hold of themselves a bit more. And choose the times when that is necessary. And that also takes me to something that is quite important, I think, which is that we're all a little bit out of the routine. So build a new routine. Build a new routine, because it could be that schools are out. A lot of schools are working remotely. Some children have got work sent from schools, some others don't. Some of them are more left to their own devices. Parents are overwhelmed with everything they have to do, because they have to homeschool their children, as well as thinking about how they're going to pay bills and how long this is going to last, and not being able to see the grandparents for fear of contagion. There are so many things, so many fronts that families are fighting simultaneously at this moment, that it's very easy for parents to also be a little bit more stressed. So I think it would help parents and children, and autistic people in general, really, to build up a new routine, to think of the following day and plan what they're going to do at this time, what they're going to do afterwards. I would put a few breaks in between, so that they can give themselves time out for the times when they might have a spike in anxiety, actually. because of something that they've listened to or something that they've watched on the news, or, you know, or just a feeling that, you know, sometimes just being with our own thoughts can create anxiety for us when suddenly we have a worrying thought. So, you know, it's about sort of building a new routine, which is, it's a bit of a tall order because we don't know how long this is going to last.
Yeah.
And that's also problematic, isn't it? Because if you think, well, you know, a couple of weeks and then we're back to normal, but we don't know. The reality is that the more this thing has advanced, the more we realize we don't know. No one knows.
Yeah, it's a big
So
challenge. Yeah.
it's a big challenge to sort of think, well, I'm building a new routine, but I don't know how long it's going to last. So my recommendation is build a routine for a week or for 4 days. And if that works, see if you can stretch it a bit more. Maybe some things have worked really well in that routine, some other things haven't. So maybe you can think of something else. You can take something out and add something in which is different. So think about modest goals. You know, don't think about a whole month because you might just get lost in that.
I think that's
Think
very
about what
important.
you're going to do the following week.
Yeah.
Monday to Friday, you may want to do something slightly different on weekends, but always sort of have a sense of in your mind of the things that you're going to do, how you're going to go about them, and the times that when you may need to take time out. And I think, again, that applies to all of us. But for people with, you know, for autistic people, it's a very important part, really, to feel that they've got a bit of space, to process things that might require perhaps a bit more effort.
I think just in terms of you know, in recognition of the challenge that lies ahead, you know, as you described, you know, it's a big challenge. But in recognition of that, it might be useful. I don't know what your thoughts on this are, but it might be useful to sort of build sort of self-confidence that you have the ability to rise to challenging circumstances based on previous successes. So it might. I was thinking it might be helpful for people to, you know, sort of consciously think up those particularly those times in life where big transitions and change have occurred, and as similar types of anxieties have arisen as a consequence, and you know, sort of reflect upon, actually, I got through that. I yes, it was challenging. Yes, there may have been bumps, but overall, you know, it was a useful journey, and there were some wins. You know, there were always going to be wins in every situation. So perhaps sort of you know, in build, because I think, you know, as you said, you know, there's so much going on. It's so difficult. It is a big challenge, but sort of self-talk is going to help, you know, build some reassurance, reflect on previous wins. I think is going to probably be useful. Would you agree?
I think that's always useful, and I always, that's something also I always do with autistic young people. We always go back to places or things that they have done that have made them feel good, have made them calm down. Which could be, like I said, could be a place, could be a thought, could be doing something. You know, I think going over the past and seeing what you can pick up from the past that you can still use, I think is always useful. I was thinking about the question, and I was thinking about the young woman who is, you know, has a job, she lives with her parents, and I think the health in the family is compromised, and there is an elderly person. I think, see, that those things are anxiety provoking by themselves, particularly in the current climate, you know. So again, I think I would recommend staying with the here and now, staying with the present, because if you start to think about what might be happening at what point, again, it's going to feel overwhelming, and it can create a huge anxiety. So
yeah, I fully agree. I mean, I think you've got to. It's going to be useful. I don't know if you agree with this also, but it's going to be useful to sort of realize that there are some things that are controllable, and many things, especially in this situation, that are not.
Yes.
And sort of recognizing that a lot of this, maybe 60-70% of it, is not under your control, and sort of accept that. I think it's perhaps wasted energy to try to the valuable energy to try to control and lose yourself to stress over things that are not controllable. And I liked your earlier suggestion about some examples as to how we could maybe control some of this. For example, you were saying that, okay, produce new routines, find new routines that you can put into your everyday new life, set modest, doable goals, for sure. And you also said something very important, I think, which is to find a safe time-out space, a place that you can sort of recenter, regulate, that you find safe, and that recharges you. I think if you can find that space in your home, wherever it is, and then perhaps recognize when you need to access that, so again, sort of self-thinking, self-reflection, those are sort of controllable, doable, helpful things, I think. So that's really, really, really useful. What do you think, James?
I was thinking from an autistic point of view, we have, I totally agree with a lot of what you're saying. In our lives, we have already sort of we've had our personal crisis throughout our lives, and we've learned to cope. We've developed coping mechanisms already, and we've found things that comfort us in stressful times. And I think it's what I've been doing is setting a limit on looking at the news, because it does bombard you, and it is so negative. It's such a negative force in our lives, and it's very difficult not to fixate on it. So I've been setting time, like I'll watch the news for a short time in the morning and a short time in the evening, and that's it. And then I'll do whatever tasks I have to do, but in whatever break times that I've got, I'll do something that's a hobby that's really comforting to me.
Yes, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
I was thinking about that today as well, because this just came to me this morning, and I thought it coincided with doing this thing with you, with the London Autism Group. I was thinking about Boris Johnson's diagnosis that he's got the coronavirus. And I was thinking, well, this, whatever your thoughts are about him, which, we're not going to enter into that debate, for the Prime Minister to be sick with this, I was just thinking, for some people, it might also feel as if, the father of, well, he's in a sort of, he's the Prime Minister, he's the person in charge of the government, he's off sick, who's going to look after, the whole thing? Then I think probably he was, assessed, and he did a message in a remote way saying, I'm still going to be managing blah, blah, blah. And I think, well, depending on how sick you are, you may or may not be able to do that. But I was just thinking how that sort of new development of a politician who's who's the Prime Minister being sick with this thing that everyone is fighting against, how that may have caused anxiety in a lot of different corners of the country, really. But about who's in charge, where the scientists and the chief medical officer and all these people are advising the Prime Minister, but it's still, what I'm saying is that these things that are a bit accidental and just are what they are can also easily raise anxiety in the population. Because initially there was one type of advice as to what we should all be doing, and then the advice changed. All of these things probably make people wonder how safe we are, actually, if the advice keeps changing. So I think everyone has to now develop a bit of day by day, because things can change day by day. Just have modest goals, have goals for the next 3-4 days, have goals for the week. And what works this week might work the following week. And if things change externally, it could be that you need to introduce something else in that routine, which may involve more time out, may involve more of a sensorial experience that helps you to feel better and feel calmer. So my advice is make a plan, but be also willing to review it, because this is what I do with autistic young people. Sometimes we make a plan with the school, for example, about what's going to happen if they feel very anxious, and then that plan works for a couple of weeks, and then something else, there may be a new element in it, which could be a new lesson, or it could be something's happening in the school, or builders in the school, could be anything. It introduces another variable. So you always need to have a routine, but not one that is written in stone. Be prepared to introduce new elements to it that are connected with your sense of well-being.
That's great. I agree. I was also thinking about again, I mean, just following up on your idea about self-reflection and being quite sort of conscious about your sort of thoughts and plans and being quite strategic. But I think something else I thought that might be useful is, again, picking up on what James was saying about, and what you were saying about Boris, all of the news, all of the wider anxieties associated with that, being bombarded with all this information and everything else. I think there is a particular vulnerability here as a particular risk for people to catastrophize, to panic.
Yeah.
I think it's reasonable to feel stressed and anxious and worried, but I don't think it's reasonable to think that catastrophizing the situation is going to help you, really. So while I think it's reasonable to feel very concerned and confused and anxious, I don't think it's reasonable that those thoughts are going to help you going forwards strategically. So, I'm a sort of big believer in cognitive, restructuring, let's say, where you sort of try to, through self-talk and perhaps through bouncing off ideas with, others, think about how and where exactly you might be able to change your thoughts from being unhelpful in that way for your mental health, essentially, and going forwards, to being in a more healthy place. Like we said, recognizing that the situation isn't going to be fully in your control. There is likely to be a light at the end of the tunnel, and there is reason to be hopeful. There are things you can do to control certain aspects, such as you said, James, finding things that you enjoy to do, to regulate yourself. All of these, there are many things that you can do that are more helpful and beneficial to perhaps, very, very, almost polluting thoughts. I think it's okay to recognize there's a bad situation, but not to let that pollute your being, and as I said, focus on those things that are more healthy in your life, controlling your routines, as you said, finding things that you enjoy doing. And the other thing we haven't mentioned yet, I think, is access support. We're lucky that we live in.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, actually. That once you've done everything you can do for yourself, which person out there can give you a sense of, can convey a sense of calmness and well-being, or can say to you, look, let's just think about this. What do you need to do? What would you normally do in this case? Because again, this is what I do with young people, with young autistic people. We normally go through plans. We make plans for the situations that they may encounter. And, these are different for everyone. Everybody's different. And, it's not a one size fits all at all. Everybody has different ways of managing. And finding someone who is aware of this sort of struggle that you may come up against, and can help you to go through the motions, can help you to go through the steps, to help you to calm down, to help you to feel a bit more in command again, in control, that can be really useful. So really, the what I would recommend is, first of all, you make your own plans. You plan your day, you develop your routine and all of that. But then, which person in your family or friends, or it could be an online friend, can be there for you to help you to regain some of that? Because sometimes, when we're by ourselves, it's a little bit difficult to get out of a certain mindset.
Yeah.
If it has become, if you feel bombarded by those worrying thoughts.
Yeah.
So to go to another person that you have already identified, and the person knows you well, and the person knows that they're there to help you to take those steps, go through those motions with you, that can be a great help. And like I said, that could come in any number of ways. Could be a friend, a neighbor, a family member, or an online friend. It's just another mind that helps your mind to slow itself down and regain some sense of stability.
Yeah, and obviously there's loads of Facebook groups. Obviously, a bit of self-promotion here. The London Autism Group have always got people's backs, and the charity as well. Just to sort of, say again that the charity are going to implement a couple of other things to support people's mental health, including we have this idea of training some volunteers to support people through instant messaging, which might be useful.
Yeah.
So I think just recognizing that you're not actually fully alone, understanding that support could potentially be very helpful for you. You certainly won't get any of the benefits if you don't attempt to access any support. That's worth thinking about. So we have a question. I don't know if you can see the question, Lola.
I can, yes.
Oh, okay. So the question here is from Lily van Verdriet, who asks, how do people deal with being in lockdown when they have an oppositional defiant disorder? So I'm going to assume that she is talking about her I don't know, one of her family members, her child, perhaps.
Probably.
Yeah. So that's a tricky one. Obviously, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, it's the idea that, autistic people or whoever it is can really sort of get into a consistent pattern of defiance and oppositional responses, more so than perhaps the neurotypical population. So I think that's a really, really good question, because that's another sort of level of difficulty, isn't it? I have some thoughts about that, Lily, so we'll get into them. I'm sure James is as well, but Lola, have you got any to start with?
Well, start, and then I'll get some. I was just thinking, well, trying to get my thoughts together.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to go, or else James, you want to pick this one up, or shall I?
I think you go first, then I'll go.
Okay. So my thoughts on this is that obviously oppositional defiance disorder is a very, very challenging thing. However, in my opinion, a lot of the defiance stems from, and I don't want to sort of underplay anything, or I don't want to sort of underappreciate the difficulty of it. But I think a lot of it can be, to some extent, mitigated and managed through really understanding the granularity of the antecedents of why the defiance is happening. Obviously, you have to be very, very sort of meticulous in your investigation as to what's leading to those behaviors and those defiant responses. But it could well be that in many instances they are actually quite reasonable given the variables that are being plugged in. And so it's important to understand those variables would be my advice in these sorts of things. But the problem is that obviously when you're in the situation that we're in, things are upside down. Everything is much, much more harder, and being meticulous and very sort of patient with these things and being energized to tackle these things is particularly difficult. You have to be very resilient, very patient, very energized mentally, and have a lot of time and space to be able to really dissect these sorts of things and really work with it. But in the current climate, all of that is challenged. So I don't think there is unfortunately a magic solution to this situation, other than my advice would be to be very, as much as you can, accepting, and you know, sort of patient and calm in response to it, and to sort of self-think that actually there may very well be a lot of reasons as to what's underpinning those responses that you can't see at the moment, but you may see down the line. So to be mindful of that. But I appreciate, obviously, it is a very, very difficult one in the circumstances that we're in, where, you know, our energy is much lower, our mental energy is lower, our resilience is lower. There's all sorts of reasons for why there might be problems in this way, because of the, you know, mixing people's worlds and mix up the upside down situation we all find ourselves in. So it's particularly difficult. The other thing I would say is, one other thing I would say is to sort of try to, as a person responding to this, certainly try to charge yourself mentally using some of the tips that Lola is describing, you know, like find social support, you know, find new routines, congratulate yourself with the victories, you know, don't beat yourself up with the bumps in the road, you know, and be kind to yourself. You know, that is going to, you know, help you in those difficult, challenging interactions. Those are my sort of initial thoughts.
James, do you have any thoughts, or shall I say something? What do you think?
Just some very brief thing. I think it's, demand avoidance is it's a massive topic, and I think as Chris was saying, you know, it normally under normal circumstances it can take a long time. You have to look at it in a very calm way, and play a detective role and look at all the sort of factors of it could be anything that's causing these kind of things. It could be many different issues that we all neurodiverse people suffer with. It could be sensory issues. It could, you know, it could be many different things that are contributing to it. So there is an organization called the PDA Society, the Pathological Demand Avoidance, it's also known as. And they are very, very good. So they have a website, and they give advice on there that's really, really good. So I'd recommend going to them. But anyway, I'll hand over to you now, Lola.
Well, no, I was just going to add something that normally we recommend as well, which is, again, you know, setting up some kind of a routine, always keeping in mind that things are so different from how life normally would be, you know, so that this is going to impact the parents and consequently the children. Is, you know, when you set up when you are trying to build a routine for a young person who might have this presentation, it's always good to set goals and to also think about the steps that lead towards those goals. So because I think a sudden change in route, if there is an activity and then that activity comes to an end, and then it's always good to say, well, you know, you can play this for another 15 minutes, and then I will ask you to switch it off, and then do this, and then we'll move on to this and this and that. Sort of advanced warnings normally work, or at least help to, you know, to make the transition from one activity to another, because otherwise the temptation is sort of to, you know, to not have any boundaries, which is just not to have a confrontation, or just not to be faced with an oppositional episode. So, to set goals and to also be mindful of the steps that lead towards those goals. So think about the transitions in between the different bits of the routine. Because I mean, it's far too complex for us to sort of give a quick solution here in terms of what the history might be for that. But in any case, I think facilitating transitions is always a useful thing. That's my something I recommend to a lot of families in these situations.
I hope that's helpful to some extent, Lily. Feel free to respond in the comments if you'd like to pick anything up. Thank you, Inge Spawn, for your feedback there. Great point, Lola. Love your point of view. We also had Mary Dumbilly earlier saying, well said, Lola, though a big challenge, it's doable. And also thank you to Timothy Lewis. Great point, Christopoulos. So that's kind. Okay, so I just wanted to add a couple of other thoughts more broadly as to, on the topic that we're on. And what about, Lola and James, what are your thoughts about externalizing concerns, such as journal entries and diarizing things? The reason why I bring it up is because my son, my eldest son, who's 10 years old, he's really been struggling with everything. Exactly what we're talking about in terms of shake up with routines, what he was sort of expecting isn't going to be happening. Not being able to do all the things that he enjoys that regulate him. He's really, really struggling. And one of the things I sort of recommended right from the beginning to center him and to enable him to cope was this idea of externalizing through a vlog, a daily vlog. So he's sort of got this YouTube daily 3-4 minute video entry that he does where he describes what he's thinking, what he's feeling, whatever he wants to say. And I mean, at least in my own anecdotal perspective, it seems to sort of recharge him and re-regulate him and recenter him and reduce anxiety each time he does it. Even if it's temporary, it's a win of sorts. So, and it might be something also useful that might be useful retrospectively to look back on later on as a sort of a track of the journey, and a source of reflection maybe later on down the line. What about that? Have you any?
I think that's a great idea. I think it's very, very useful, and I'm glad you brought it up actually, because it's a very useful thing and something I recommend too, which is that while it's down on paper in a diary or in a blog, while it's out there and you can look at it, it's not inside your mind going round and round in a sort of more chaotic way. Once it's out on paper, which could be, through something written, something drawn, or something recorded, in the case of your son, once it's out there, it allows you to look at it. It gives you a bit of distance from those things that otherwise are a bit more of a disorganized chaos in your mind. So bringing it out allows you a third point of view almost on your own thoughts. And I think that can really help. And you're right that can also help further down the line in terms of, do you remember when you felt so overwhelmed that day and then you did this and that helped? So it's almost as if it helps autistic people to build up a little bit of a toolkit of things that can help them in situations in the future. And this is what we do with young people, what I try to do with young people. Think of things that they can do when they're faced with unpredictable stuff, which can happen. I think families, for the most part, try to keep things as stable as possible. But, for example, what's happening now with the coronavirus, no one is very stable anywhere. So you know, uh, remembering how you managed that situation that you found so stressful, which could be, saying goodbye to someone, finishing school, or having to go on holiday to a certain place that you're not very sure of. All of these things that bubble up as anxieties. If you've conquered those, that's something for you to remember how you managed to do that. And some of those skills, can be brought back to saying, actually, I did manage that. And yes, I was very worried, but I did manage. So that, I managed that, so I might be able to manage this as well. I think these sort of quite concrete aids are very useful.
Yeah, it goes back to what we were saying about earlier, in terms of, recognizing historical wins, and having something concrete, as you described, to actually remind yourself of the challenges that, and the complexities of that challenge that you actually processed and got through in your own way. That can be reassuring, give you that confidence that helps beat off anxiety. The other thing that we should probably mention, I think, is sort of checking in with each other, right, as a family unit. If we can, sort of communicating, in whatever way communication works in your family, because of course communication works in different ways. Doesn't have to always be verbal, but as much as possible, I'd recommend really sort of communicating and checking in regularly about how people are feeling, what they're thinking. I think that can be quite helpful. And if it leads to some sort of positive outcome, if you check in with your partner or your child or whoever it is, your parent, and it leads to some kind of positive outcome, that also is good for mental health, isn't it? Because when you help people, that's one of the most powerful things, isn't it, for mental health? It gives you it often gives you a sort of better sense of self-efficacy, right? A sense of accomplishment. Wow, you actually made a difference, and that can be started just from checking in, right? Any thoughts on that?
It's why I do, why I'm here.
Yeah,
definitely, 100%. I agree. Yeah.
James is always, by the way, I should say, James is always supporting me. We're always sort of communicating. I'm always like, James, I'm feeling a bit stressed, and like, so, oh, Chris, let's talk it through. So I mean, it certainly has helped with James and I when we talk. But for sure, just checking in with your family is going to be helpful, isn't it? Communication, seems obvious, but possibly worth reminding people that.
I think so too, and I think two minds are always better than one. Because like again, it gives us a bit more of an additional thinking capacity. And yes, sometimes when I work with autistic young people, I'm always very mindful that they don't know me very well if they've just arrived, but and I can only go by what they tell me, and I always ask them, what works for you? What's the thing that worries you the most, and what works for you? How can we, what are the things that you dread the most, and how can we help you to deal with those? And just making a step-by-step thing is for them very. Sometimes they haven't even done that breakdown of ideas until they come, and then they realize that actually this is something I can use here or there. So to do that within the family is also very important. So if it's an autistic young person or an adult, or to just have someone who is aware of the things that you may need to do. It's a little bit of what I said earlier, but I think it's to have another mind and to have connectedness is such a great thing. And sometimes it takes us out of the dark hole that we get ourselves into, like you were saying, Chris. Sometimes we all feel overwhelmed and sort of in a bit of I don't know what to do. And then actually you speak to a friend, and suddenly the fog begins to dispel, and you can see things a bit more clearly. So in the case of autistic people, I think having someone in the family or several people in the family who are aware of what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Just the knowledge that this person knows what you're feeling or what you might be feeling, that alone is a help.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just the mindfulness in someone else who may be doing their own thing, but you are aware that if you feel anxious or you feel as if you might want to have a meltdown, this other person is there and they might understand and they would understand. Or you can go and say, actually, I'm not feeling great.
Yeah.
So I think these things are really important, and obviously, the families that I work with normally work very hard at this, at understanding the signs in the autistic young person to be able to help them out when they need it.
That's great. Thank you. We've got a question here from Nadia Jalad, who says, my 3.5-year-old non-verbal son has started to hit and smack mainly everything in his sight. It started since we have been social distancing at home and he's not at nursery. Okay, well, if that started, Nadia, almost as soon as this change occurred and he's at home and self-isolating, I'd say that's almost certainly down to anxiety. That's a sort of symptom, a product, if you like, of the issues that we're talking about, for sure. The anxieties, the stress, the confusion, and I would say that's very, very likely, especially since it started after this big change happened, and routines went downwards. So my advice to you would be to sort of follow. If you didn't tune in from the beginning, rewind. We're going to have I'm going to have this recording made available on our charity Facebook page, and also our YouTube channel, which you can find by going to youtube.com and just searching for London Autism Group Charity, and listen to the sort of advice. Listen to the advice that we've been talking about. I mean, there is not going to be a magic wand with this sort of situation, unfortunately. There's nothing that we can say that's going to suddenly, lead him to stop doing this. And I imagine it's very, very distressing and scary and anxiety provoking for you. I mean, crikey, I can't imagine. So my heart does go out to you a lot.
Yes.
But I do think it's ultimately likely to be down to these anxieties and distress and confusion. So it's going to just be about implementing some of those things that we've been talking about, really, and hope to see some changes and improvements as your son finds a new routine, a new structure, and you look after each other in the way that we've been talking about. I don't know if you have any additional thoughts on that one, guys.
James, you go first.
Okay. It kind of reminds me of when my son was that age. He got a special place. Children don't normally get a place at nursery school so young, but he was globally developmentally delayed, and the local authority pushed to have him put into a nursery school, and part of the week he went to Oakley School, which is a special school, but it was only for partially part of the week, and part of the week he was in a mainstream nursery. And in the mainstream nursery, they didn't really have one-to-one, which is what he really needed. So because of that, his teacher he had a teacher for a month, and he was getting on fine because she gave him lots of extra time, but then she went off sick. And I noticed I would drop him there. They didn't have anything negative to report back, so I kept dropping him. He started hitting himself. in the groin area, which is one of the most sensitive parts of the body. And he was doing this a lot at home. So I came in with him and I said, look, is there anything that's changed here? And they said, well, the teacher's gone off sick. And they weren't able to give him the extra time anymore. So I went in and watched what they were doing with him in the morning, and they were basically just leaving him a lot of the time to his own devices, and he had severe anxiety because of that. So now it's still now, whenever he's left to his own devices, whenever he's bored, he's unsure of what to do, he will do that hitting. And what he's actually doing by hitting, he's creating a sensory, a powerful sensory sensation in his body, and he's regulating because of that.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So even though it's quite self-harmful, so what might be useful if he is using it to regulate is to introduce lots of sensory play, things like if you have an exercise ball that he can bounce on, or messy play, that kind of thing. There's a website called the Sensory Projects, and they will have lots of resources on there that you can find. There's a lady called Joanna Grace, and she's a sensory expert. We've actually, in the Autism podcast, I've interviewed her, which is on our website. So possibly that might be one way to address the problem.
Just want to sort of highlight that, James, that Nadia, please, if you haven't listened to it, go and have a listen to the interview that James did with Joanna Grace, which is all about the sensory world and how that really interacts with everything and all the complexities. It's really fascinating. You might get some useful tips and insights that you hadn't realized before that might be helpful. So you can do that by going to Google and just searching for the Autism Podcast, or just get a podcast app on your phone, perhaps the Apple Podcasts app, and searching for the Autism Podcast, and you'll see it. If you don't find it, just let us know, and we'll direct you. But yeah, that's a really good point. The action of hitting and smacking is likely to be a sort of sensory regulation thing, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I was thinking that also it's also he's probably wondering what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, so he's sort of protest. I know it's a sensory expression, but it's also a protest of why am I not going back to school? Why are we all at home all the time? Why have things changed so much so suddenly? I was thinking of something that they use in the school where I work, which is the social stories books, which involves sort of things that happen, like, for example, going on holiday. It means that they make a book with a picture of their home, of the plane that they're going to go into, of the place that you're going to go into, the people that you're going to see at the other end, and then they're coming back to school. So I was just wondering, and it's all visual, but I was just wondering whether there has to be an acknowledgement from the part of the parents to this child that suddenly has, for no reason that he can understand, has stopped going to nursery school, has stopped seeing other children, has stopped seeing his teachers. So normally schools have websites, so it's not difficult to obtain photographs from the classroom or the teacher, or a number of things that might look familiar to him, because I think that he needs to understand that is still there and that he will go back to that place one day. I think he needs an explanation, actually, because I mean, it's really difficult for us to have to accept lockdown. For a child who's nonverbal, is phenomenally difficult. It's really sort of quite a it's almost like an impossible task, but the visuals work really well, which is when children understand that they've been in this place, they're now here, and at some point we're going to be here for some days, and then we'll go back there. So it's almost like, like I said, an acknowledgement that there has been a big change in our lives and in his life.
Yeah, fully agree.
We are experiencing a deep sense of loss about his school and his teacher and the children in his class and the activities that he does there. If he's happy at nursery school, which the indication is that he may be. So, sort of social storybooks, which, school can make, but the parents can make them too, which they consist of just sort of visual, it could be photographs of the places that they know. Sorry, I'm doing this, I'm covering the camera. I'm just imagining different pages. And because, sometimes children have to go on long plane journeys to visit their families. And this really helps, to do this beforehand, because then the children know that after the plane and the sitting there for X number of hours, they will get to this house where you will see these people. And all these things, I think, are very helpful for children, because then at the end of that, there is another continuation, which is you will get on another plane and you will come back home. So it's the idea that, we can deviate from our ordinary routine by doing this, this, and this, and then we will come back to, to where we live or where we belong. And I think this can be very useful tools for nonverbal children in particular.
Yeah, thank you, Lola. Fully agree. Thanks, James. I've just seen, Nadia, you've just added there that you don't know how good his understanding is. He has global delay, and you've also said that you're going to try doing these things for sure. So that's great to hear. Just as to your previous point about how good his understanding is, I think for you it's not going to be a matter of really knowing how good his understanding is, but rather measuring and assessing changes in his observable physical self and his behaviors. Do you know what I mean? So you can gauge things as to how his anxiety might be reducing and how much calmer he might be and more happier in himself he might be, simply from his sort of non-verbals, his subtle interactions, and his behaviors as well. And even though he's maybe non-verbal, as you said earlier, there are other ways of communicating. Communication happens in many different ways. So I think there are ways of entering his world and sort of assessing how he's feeling. As a parent, also, you're going to have a good feel for how he's doing too. So,
and also, I'm so sorry, I've interrupted you. No, I was just thinking about perhaps doing activities with him that are similar to what he does at school. Sort of making links. But he needs these links have to be made. He was there, and suddenly he's here. Not only he's here all the time with his parents. So it's a big change. So
that's a great point.
Making links with that place that he's temporarily lost. It's an acknowledgement that place exists inside his mind, and there can be things that you can do to link them up.
The last thing I'll say about it, Nadia, is also look after yourself and your partner's self, your own well-being, because if you're feeling well and calm, you're then able to sort of engage in these quite complex, challenging, situations and tasks. But do try and perhaps heed some of Lola's earlier advice about, self-care, communicating with your family and your other half, and look after yourself as well. Try and get that sleep, engage in things that you find enjoyable, do the basics as well, like sleep, nutrition, exercise.
Yes, and don't feel bad putting yourself first, because parents need to look after themselves to be able to look after their children. So, parents are important. It's not all about self-sacrifice. It's not about that. It's about you being well, you staying strong, to meet the challenges that you're going to have, because
Yeah.
there will be many others, and you need to look after your own well-being, um,
Yeah.
for the sake of your own sake, for the sake of your marriage, for the sake of or your partner, for the sake of your entire family. Um, so
Definitely. Yeah.
take time out to do that. Make sure there are things that you do for yourself that you enjoy and make you feel good.
Okay, so that's wonderful. You're welcome, Nadia. I'm glad that's helpful for you. So actually, it's coming up to an hour. So this live stream was scheduled for 8:30 to 9:30, and we're there. So, are there any other sort of additional thoughts or points either of you want to make, just to sort of transition out of this live stream? Any other thoughts or questions? Anything else that you wanted to pick up?
I wanted to briefly ask Lola if I was thinking about how we deal with stress and what's a healthy way to deal with it, because what I tend to do is I mean, we're sort of under a lot more stress than usual at the moment, and I tend to sort of compartmentalize my thoughts at the moment and put the worst things aside, and try to get on with the present. But so, is that a healthy way to do it, or is there another way to do it? What do you think, Lola?
Well, James, I think it's a bit what I said earlier, that everybody needs to find their own way, and I think thinking about the present, thinking about the here and now, and not looking too wide is one way of doing that. Sort of tackle what you've got in front of you, unless there is something really pressing that like having to pay your rent or whatever, or your phone bill, or else you're going to be cut off. Everything else. You see, this is a time where the whole country is stressed, the whole of Europe is stressed. In fact, the whole world is stressed. So I'm saying this because at the moment we all need to cut ourselves some slack, because there aren't many places where we can run from this. You cannot go on holiday. You cannot do a lot of things that you would be doing or you cannot go out with a friend. You have to think about the day-to-day and try to diminish or at least locate where your stress is and deal with that. Deal one at a time.
Yeah.
And whatever can wait. If one day you're not feeling very strong, if one day you've had a bad sleep and you're not feeling very well, if it's not urgent, leave it. Leave it. Think about it and tackle it tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's not a bad thing to actually think, actually, I'm not having a good day today, and I'm going to make it easy for myself, and leave that for another time. So, look at the overall view of what is stressful, and try to pick the things that you can tackle in a way that you can manage without feeling that it's too much for you. And leave the rest. It doesn't mean that you have to procrastinate eternally, but there are some days where we all feel we can, okay, today I'm going to make that phone call, or today I'm going to do that, or I'm going to go shopping, or I'm going to try to see if I find toilet roll, which is a challenge for the entire country at the moment. There are tasks that are a bit harder, and some days you're able to tackle those, and some other days you just don't have it in you, and that's fine, really. Yeah. I don't know if I have been able to help, James, but I think we all have to be a bit kinder to ourselves at the moment.
Yeah, I find that reassuring, really, that I'm not doing anything wrong, so that's reassuring. Yeah.
Yes. Okay.
Excellent. Okay, so unless either of you have any other points that you wanted to raise, I think we'll probably sort of slowly end it there. Just a couple of things I just want to highlight before we finish. I mentioned the Autism podcast earlier. I just also want to draw people's attention to the episode that we did with Lola.
Oh, yeah.
Please go and listen to that. It's fantastic. We talk about many interesting things that I think are very pertinent to the current situation that we're in with regard to mental health and some of the issues that we've talked about today. Yeah, please go and listen to that podcast if you haven't already. It would be very useful. And also next week, we're going to have another live stream. We're aiming to have it with Robert White, who came second in Britain's Got Talent a couple of years ago. The autistic comedian, who's been really supportive of the charity and a good friend of mine. So we'd be very excited to have him on and perhaps cheer us all up a little bit. I just want to say a big thank you, Lola, to you for taking the time and giving us your energy, and your insight. I think it's been really, really useful. And so I just want to sort of give you a big thanks, and you too, James. Thanks.
Well, it's I think this is a time when we all have to help each other, if at all possible. So if this has been able to help someone, and I think that is great. So I'm pleased to be able to do this.
Okay, all right. So I think we'll check out now, and hope to talk to you all very soon again at some point in the future. So take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Bye.